ever-changing landscape of the Democratic race for president. Joe Biden, fresh off his victory in 9 states on Super Tuesday, is getting yet another jolt. Billionaire Michael Bloomberg announced earlier today he's suspending his campaign, throwing his support behind the former vice president. Natalie Brand reports.
Joe Biden's big comeback on Super Tuesday has knocked Mike Bloomberg out of the race. The former New York mayor endorsed Biden in a statement saying, "I'm a believer in using data to inform decisions." After yesterday's results, the delegate math has become virtually impossible and a viable path to the nomination no longer exists. Aides say Senator Elizabeth Warren is reassessing her campaign and will have more to say in the coming days.
They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing.
Former Vice President Biden claimed the frontrunner status last night, picking up victories in 9 of the 14 states voting.
We're told, well, when you got to Super Tuesday, it'd be over. Well, it may be over for the other guy.
Senator Bernie Sanders did not have the night his campaign hoped for, but he still picked up victories in 3 states and is leading in California, with votes there still being counted.
You cannot beat Trump with the same old kind of politics.
Exit polling revealed electability was a top priority for Super Tuesday voters, a wide margin saying they would prefer a nominee who can beat President Trump to one they agree with on major issues.
This campaign will send Donald Trump packing. This campaign is taking off. Join us.
Biden picked up a majority of African Americans and voters over 45, while Sanders performed much better with Latinos and voters under 45.
An unprecedented grassroots, multi-generational, multiracial movement.
The two-man race continues next Tuesday, when 6 states will go to the polls. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
For the latest on the 2020 race, I want to bring in Sean Sullivan, a CBSN political contributor and national politics reporter for the Washington Post. So, Sean, Michael Bloomberg dropping out of the race after winning only America's Samoa, is he is a data guy. Numbers weren't on his side. Neither was momentum. Are those the reasons why he chose to drop out now?
Yeah, it looked like there was really no path for Bloomberg moving forward, especially when you consider the performance of Joe Biden last night, who was able to win not just in the states that he was expected to do well in, but also in some other states. So it was not surprising to see Bloomberg and his campaign, given Biden's strength in this race. And you're starting to see even more consolidation now among centrist Democrats in this race right now. We started seeing that over the weekend, but now we're seeing it even more with Bloomberg's departure. So that's good news for Joe Biden, unquestionably.
And Senator Elizabeth Warren, she failed to win her home state of Massachusetts. She came in far behind Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Walk us through her thinking right now. Do you think she will drop out?
Well, it's hard to say because on the one hand, she has had virtually no success in any of these early states, as you mentioned, including her home state, including a neighboring state, New Hampshire, and including a range of other states where the campaign thought that they were going to do well. There just haven't been any signs of momentum. On the other hand, she has continued to raise money. She raised about $29 million during what was a pretty difficult month for her. So if she has the resources to continue her campaign, then there's a question for her. Does she want to keep going, even if there's not a path forward? Does she see herself as somebody who could be a unity candidate if Biden stumbles or Sanders stumbles? But right now, the path ahead is very, very, very difficult, very daunting for her. Which is why I think we're seeing her go through this decision-making process.
Sean, it's so interesting. Before South Carolina, Biden didn't have any sort of win on the scoreboard at that point. He's got this win off of South Carolina, all these endorsements now, post-Super Tuesday as well, the momentum from that. How do you explain how Biden was able to turn things around after that big South Carolina win?
Well, a couple of things that are worth reflecting on. One, the size of the win, I think, surprised a lot of people. He was favored heading into South Carolina. He has strong support from African-American voters who make up a big part of the electorate in South Carolina. But I think the scale of that victory was something that turned a lot of heads, not just in South Carolina, but around the country. And then to see the consolidation that quickly happened after that, the speed in which people like Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and others rallied behind his candidacy was something that was pretty stunning to a lot of Democrats and signaled to a lot of people who may have been on the fence or who may have been looking for a candidate to support that he was that candidate. And finally, there is a part of the Democratic Party right now that there has been for a while that is worried about the rise of Senator Bernie Sanders and are looking to rally around a candidate who would stop him in this election. And I think a lot of people view Joe Biden as that candidate. When you look at the long arc of Biden's candidacy, he enters this race, he starts as a front runner, he's performing well in national polls, he's performing well in state polls. And then as we get into that first batch of states, Iowa, New Hampshire, he struggles. His campaign is sort of on the ropes, but then he comes back, he wins resoundingly in South Carolina, and here we are the day after Super Tuesday with a totally different race than we saw a week ago.
This is part of the reason why I love American politics. You never know what can happen sometimes. Sean Sullivan, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Now I want to bring in Antjuan Seawright and Molly Hooper. Antjuan is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Molly's a CBSN political contributor. Okay, Antjuan, to you, Michael Bloomberg dropping out of the race, spending millions, has millions on hand as well, potentially to pour into a Democratic race. First off, what do you make about his decision?
Well, I was very critical of Mayor Bloomberg on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan last year in November, saying skipping South Carolina was the highest act of political malpractice a candidate could commit, because I knew the importance of South Carolina. I knew what the most consequential voting bloc in this party was going to demonstrate to the American people, and I knew the momentum winning South Carolina was going to have and the effect going into the pivotal Super Tuesday contest. And as a result, it looks like I was right in many ways, but I also commend the mayor for wanting to get in the game. It's one thing to be on the sideline and insist that certain plays be executed, but he was one of those persons who decided to get off the sidelines, get in the game, and try to execute his own plays, and for his commitment to this party to continue to make some serious investments in what I think will be the most consequential presidential election of my political lifetime. I commend him for that.
Molly, it was also a bad night for Elizabeth Warren. I mean, she didn't even win her home state. She didn't win any of the contests. And it's painful for a lot of people. I was looking at the reaction on social media. She was really one of the top women right now. We're really the only top woman at this point. What does it mean for her? I mean, what does she really have to gain by sticking it out at this point?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that's one of the reasons why an official in her campaign essentially sent an email to the campaign staff saying, last night wasn't the best night for us, and we need to take a day or two to reassess. It's my understanding she doesn't have anything on her public calendar until Friday, so she'll have today, tomorrow to sort of to regroup and say, is it worth moving on, or is it worth getting out of the race? Is it time to cut bait and let, and then if she does leave the race at this time, does she endorse or does she not endorse? Because it's unclear that whether her supporters would necessarily go to Bernie Sanders. One thing that differentiates Elizabeth Warren from Bernie Sanders is the point that she likes to make loud and proud: I am a capitalist, not a socialist. And that's a big difference that she likes to say that separates her from Bernie Sanders. So would her supporters go to Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders? That's the question. It's
really interesting. And when you look at Minnesota, a state that Biden didn't really invest anything in, but did get Amy Klobuchar's endorsement, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota weighed in on this, talking about the lack of unity in the party, particularly the progressive win. And she tweeted this out. Imagine if the progressives consolidated last night like the moderates consolidated. Who would have won? So what's she getting at here? And talk to me a little bit about division within the Democratic Party at this point.
Well, that's kind of a dig at Elizabeth Warren, because one thing that we did see with Joe Biden over the past few days since the South Carolina primary, we saw Pete Buttigieg out of the race, Amy Klobuchar out of the race, and immediately those voters that who would have probably voted for them voted for Joe Biden, and they were quick to endorse Joe Biden and really get out and tell their voters, vote for Joe Biden. He's the moderate Democrat in this race. And Ilhan Omar, again, it's sort of a veiled attack, if you will, at Elizabeth Warren, saying, guess what? If we didn't have this problem where Elizabeth Warren, you're taking votes from Bernie Sanders, because, she does take some votes from Bernie Sanders, not necessarily all of them. They would have had a stronger showing. But still, I mean, even though Amy Klobuchar did endorse Joe Biden, and Joe Biden didn't have a great ground game in Minnesota, Bernie Sanders had Lieutenant Governor Keith Ellison, a former member of Congress, endorsing him. So he did have support in Minnesota. They just didn't turn out.
Antjuan, I want to ask you about, as we're deconstructing sort of this win on Super Tuesday in the past few days, you look at Congressman Jim Clyburn, who made this sincere, this powerful, this very emotional endorsement of Biden. It wasn't just that here's a black congressman who endorsed Joe Biden. There was a real personal connection there. Talk to me a little bit about sort of the African-American support, how much of a difference that made, and was it just Clyburn that factored into, getting the African-American vote behind Biden so firmly?
Well, Rena, I've always said the two most important words in Democratic presidential primary politics are South Carolina, but now I'm going to expand that and say the four most important words are South Carolina and Jim Clyburn.
Jim Clyburn. 5 words.
That's 5 words, my friend.
That's 5, including the and. But he's called the boss for a reason in Democratic politics, and I think that was on full display come Saturday night and last night, because I think there was a trickle effect for Vice President Biden, his momentum. The fact of the matter is, without Jim Clyburn's endorsement, I'm not sure we would be in this posture or this position today. He was the political booster cables for Joe Biden's candidacy in South Carolina, and essentially the gas in the tank that got him through Super Tuesday. And when you think about the African-American vote and you think about the type of coalition that Vice President Biden was able to put together both in South Carolina and last night Super Tuesday, the nerve center of that coalition was with African-American voters, and it was a diverse coalition within the African-American constituency, young, seasoned, rural, urban, and suburban. So it was a unique coalition, and that's what it takes for Democrats to be successful. Coalition building is the key to our long-term success.
Molly, walk me through sort of what changed. Obviously that endorsement in South Carolina was important, the win for Joe Biden in South Carolina, but then walk me through what happened a couple of days later, because it was clear it was more than just Clyburn. I don't want to diminish what he did, but there was a lot of other maneuvering behind the scenes as well.
There was a lot of other maneuvering as well, but I think that once Jim Clyburn came out and made that full-throated endorsement, and not just a full-throated endorsement, I mean, as Antjuan knows, Jim Clyburn was out on the trail campaigning hard for Vice President Biden, so he was there.
It wasn't just an endorsement.
It wasn't just a, hey, here's my endorsement, have fun now. No, Jim Clyburn was there on the scene with Joe Biden, and taking him to places like North Carolina. And there was also a huge rally in Virginia, and it really, with Jim Clyburn's seal of approval, then the dominoes again started to fall. We saw Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia, on board. Terry McAuliffe, former governor of Virginia, they came on board. Virginia was a key state. Biden won, and we just saw a sort of this more of a domino effect endorsement that it was okay for the more, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, establishment Democrats to come on board with Joe Biden. And once Pete Buttigieg really, he got out of the race, and it was clear that Amy Klobuchar was going that way too, it just opened the field up a little bit more for at least members of Congress to get on board, because there was this security that at least Joe Biden, who doesn't necessarily have the best ground game in all the states and organization, he could take on Pete Buttigieg's infrastructure, who does have a great ground game.
I want to let Antjuan get in as well. Antjuan?
Yeah. So Rena, here's the thing. While Mr. Clyburn definitely had impact in South Carolina, he went to an event in North Carolina. He did 7 states of robocalls and outreach between Saturday and Tuesday. So his reach went beyond South Carolina. I think that's going to be pivotal, and for, I think, races to come. He was one of very few people in the midterms, like Vice President Biden, that could go to these congressional districts that Donald Trump won in 2016 and Democrats lost. And he could go there and campaign with some of these candidates. So look for him to be a key component to Biden's potential long-term success in this race.
I want to thank you both, Antjuan Seawright and Molly Hooper. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.